Okay, we'll get started. Thanks for making it this far. This is the last afternoon of CIS, so I was surprised how full the room was in the last session, and now I'm kind of surprised how empty this one is. But I think we got some good material for you guys. I hope you'll enjoy it. So my name is Scott Tomilson. I'm the development manager for the PingFederate engineering team. I'm going to be talking about PingFederate and PingDirectory, what you can do with them together. Presenting alongside of John DaSilva from our professional services team. He's going to be giving you a demonstration and a walkthrough of the configuration that we're going to show. So it's a master class, and it's going to be very technical and detail-oriented around our products. So, but I've got kind of a high-level intro just to sort of set the stage for things. So I'll give you an overview of PingFed, PingDirectory, and then I'm going to talk to you about 5 life-changing features that will blow your mind, and then you go back and think about more things you can do with PingFederate and PingDirectory alongside each other. And like I said, then John will take over from there and do the demo and configuration walkthrough. So PingFederate and PingDirectory are part of our Ping Identity platform. They're on-premise products, so you download and install them. Our platform is really a combination of on-premise products and cloud offerings that at a high level provide secure access to applications for any users from any device. So you might have employees, partners, customers logging in from a desktop or a tablet or phone, accessing some sort of application, SaaS app, a mobile app, maybe custom applications that might be deployed in your own data center and in private cloud or public cloud. So we can help really secure the access between those, whatever user it is and whatever type of application they're going to. So specifically around PingFederate, imagine a lot of you are PingFederate administrators here, and you probably stayed around from the last session. So PingFederate really kind of provides the glue in the middle of a lot of this. It takes those users I talked about, employees, partners, and customers, and provides authentication services for them. It might be that PingFederate is asking them to log in into some local system to do that. It might be that they're coming through a SAML assertion through federated login, and we've got a token there, and then we're bridging that token into the applications on the other side. After the user comes into PingFederate, chances are you probably have an identity store connected to PingFederate. So that might be where the credentials are validated. That might be where you're looking up attributes about the user to maybe supplement the tokens you're going to use to bridge to the applications. So it could be a single sign-on scenario, where like a browser single sign-on scenario. It could be a mobile app scenario, like you were in the previous class. Jamshi did show how you can use PingFederate with OAuth and OpenID Connect to issue access tokens so you can secure calls between, say, a mobile app and REST APIs. And I missed Eric's slide around this, so we got a little bit of duplicate content if you were in the last one. But PingFederate ships on average every 6 months. We put out a new release of PingFederate. It's either minor or major, depending on where we're at in the life cycle of the versions. But 8.4 just came out last week. A lot of great stuff in there. A lot of the OAuth and OpenID Connect enhancements that you saw in the previous session. We've done some great scalability enhancements in it to really let customers deploy thousands of connections inside of PingFederate or thousands of OAuth clients there. So we really did a lot of great engineering work there to make that happen. And then there's some improvements which we'll touch on around self-service password reset. That was a new capability we had in PingFederate 8.3, and we've made further improvements there. And then lastly, just some interop and platform support improvements to round out the release. Now, PingDirectory, that is something that came into our family with the Unbound ID acquisition last summer. So this was the Unbound ID Datastore. And it's been rebranded since as the PingDirectory. It's very similar in nature to PingFederate. Technology-wise, it's a Java-based app. It's very little setup required for it. You can just unzip it and run it very quickly. It's designed for advanced identity access management use cases, high performance, high scalability, global deployment. So it really complements PingFederate very well in that regard. You can do some really cool stuff with PingDirectory to aggregate a lot of disparate data sources that you might have with its complementary tools, so you can really centralize all your identity and data into PingDirectory. Similar to PingFed, we are still putting out a lot of releases of PingDirectory, constantly enhancing the product. So about every 6 months or so, there's a new release. There was a 6.01 release in February that had a number of performance scalability enhancements and security enhancements there. So if you're using PingDirectory, an older release, I'd strongly encourage you to upgrade and stay current. Now, PingDirectory, it's probably obvious here where it fits in, but PingDirectory could be the identity store that PingFederate is talking to, right? This is really a simplistic view of things, though. In many cases, PingFederate also needs a data store where you're going to store additional application-specific information for PingFederate to meet its use cases. Now, probably a lot of you, if you own your PingFederate server, you probably own your directory server as well. It's the identity team that really owns that piece of infrastructure. You're probably not a DBA. You probably don't like to talk to your DBAs. You don't want to stand up a database alongside of PingFederate. So to simplify things, wouldn't it be great if these two things could just be one? So host your identity data and data, your identity information and your data needed for PingFederate to drive its features just in one central store. That could be PingDirectory. So using PingFederate and PingDirectory together, well, it's better together. I'll let you figure out who's the peanut butter and who's the jelly, but it goes really well together. So, you like that one, Eric? We're definitely the peanut butter, by the way. Yeah. So I'll talk about 5 life-changing features. Some of these are, you might think, well, that was pretty easy. You know, that's been the product a long time, but there's definitely some pros of why PingDirectory is really well suited for this. The capabilities that are in PingDirectory really complement those that are in PingFederate. So we'll talk through 5 different features, and like I said, after I give you a walkthrough overview of these, John will give you a little more details on how to set up all these and administer them. So the first one, password management. We heard a lot of sessions this week about how we're killing passwords, but the reality is we're all using passwords today. We will all use passwords next year at CIS and probably the next year. It's not going away. So you still need passwords for especially customer and work for identities. But password management isn't just putting up a login page and asking the user for username and password. There's many different features you need to balance the security needs and minimize the administrative overhead of passwords to have a complete solution. We've added a lot of capabilities in PingFed over the last few years to improve our password management functionality. This is just a sampling. I probably am forgetting 1 or 2 here, but obviously we can log in users with passwords. Password change, we can detect that when we log in a user, when they're logged in, if they require a password change, and then show them a subsequent dialog to update their password at that time. A user can choose to change their password. You can go to on the form adapter in PingFed or to a URL if you know it, to have users enter the new password if they voluntarily want to. Password policies are something that, from the PingFederate perspective, we rely on the backend Datastore to enforce. And PingDirectory's got very rich password policies that you can define in your policies there. So you can do the simple things like number of characters in uppercase, lowercase, that sort of simple stuff. But you can also do things like check if the new password is really similar to the previous one, or check if the new password contains an attribute that's in that user's entry in the directory server. So you can prevent them from maybe using their phone number or address as part of their password. We can also do password change notification. So if somebody has changed their password, that can trigger an email from PingFederate to that user to let them know that their password has changed. That could be valuable, especially in a consumer-facing deployment. Password warning expiration. So if you have a policy where the users have to change their password every 90 days, on login, you can have PingFederate realize that the user's password is going to expire in, say, 7 days, and then show them before they complete their SSO that they can change their password now or they can defer it to later. So that gives a user the opportunity to change their password maybe on a device where they're comfortable doing so. So if you're maybe on a tablet, it's really a big pain in the butt to do that on a touch screen to find a new password. So you could just ignore it for now and then wait till you're on your desktop machine and do it there. And lastly, self-service password reset and account unlock. So we support a few different mechanisms for doing this. So it could be email, one-time password, or link, a text message, one-time password using Twilio to send out the OTPs, or Ping ID. So this could be for scenarios where the user's forgotten their password. Recently in 8.4, we added the ability for for end users to just unlock their account if maybe they realize that they tried to log in 3 times with the caps lock on, and then they've locked their account, and they really don't want to reset and define a new password. They want to keep that existing password because it took them a long time to come up with a secure one that they can remember. They can go through one of these authentication options and simply unlock the account without defining a new password. So that's password management. Second feature I'll briefly touch on is attribute fulfillment. Now this is something that's been in PingFederate probably since version 1. So we've always had the ability to say what attributes are going to be put in your SAML token, what attributes are going to go in your OAuth token or your OpenID Connect ID tokens. That really is a necessary feature of an SDS to be able to send attributes over to a partner that you've got a federated trust relationship with. So you need to at least tell them who the subject is, but you probably want to tell them more things like, well, what groups are the users in, what additional attributes do we have about the user, preferences or role information that the user has. So this lets the receiving party then dictate what they want to do, how they want to control access maybe for that user, or how they're going to drive that the user's experience in that application. Now, attribute fulfillment can happen at many different layers in PingFederate. It used to be that you had to do this inside of your connection. We've changed that model a few releases ago where you can centralize it more inside of adapters or in your authentication policies. So it's at one central place you can do that, and then you can really benefit from that across many different connections without having to define those lookups again and again. So that could be during the authentication, or it could be actually after the authentication, wrapped around the adapter or in a connection or in your OAuth mappings that are essentially shared across many different clients. Probably as a lot of you are aware, we can also chain multiple lookups together. So you might want to do a lookup in one part of the directory, and then based off of that result, make another lookup in a different part of the directory to get some information about that user. So there's lots of flexibility in how you can piece those together. Now, feature number 3, OAuth data store. So if you're using OAuth with PingFederate, in many cases you need an external data store for storing some information. So this is there's 2 optional things that you might store in external storage. One is called persistent grants. Persistent grants, it's kind of a term that Ping has come up with. In most cases, it just means your refresh tokens that you're using in OAuth, but it's more of a general concept we have that captures the user's consent and records that permanently. So we need to store that for a long time because maybe a refresh token could be valid for months and months, and you can't just have that in memory or something. You probably need a way where that is kept somewhere and is revocable, and you can manage the life cycle around it. So we need a data store for that. Originally, when we came out with OAuth support in PingFed, you had to stand up a database for that. We support 4 different databases for that now, so Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, as well as Postgres. We added that in 8.4. But again, you don't like your DBAs. You want to put that in your directory. So we have had support for storing grants in a directory server since, I believe, PingFederate 8.1. So we give you the LDIF scripts to do that. We've optimized the lookups in LDIF scripts and the documentation around this to dictate to say how you should index this to get the maximum performance out of it for PingDirectory. But it ends up being a pretty natural place where you can store this information without having to introduce another external data store. Now, one question I get quite often is, well, that's great, you can store persistent grants in there. We also support the ability to store OAuth clients externally from PingFed. So you can store OAuth clients in database, but we don't yet support the ability to just put OAuth clients inside of a directory server. That's something that we're looking at doing in the near future. In most cases, you could actually just store your OAuth clients in PingFederate's local configuration, and that'll work just fine. I've had some customers ask, well, how does that scale? And then I ask, well, how many OAuth clients do you have in one? 20? And like the 20 will store just fine inside of XML files. You don't need an entry for every instance of the client. It's really just per application you need each client there. But if you are going beyond 20, if you're going into the thousands, we've done a lot of scalability work, like I mentioned in 8.4, where we can support actually hundreds of thousands of OAuth clients locally inside of our storage without an external data store. Now, there's some reasons why you might want to have that external and separate from your PingFederate configuration, like to separate it from the config replication model that we have with other things. So you're not maybe pushing out a config replication every time maybe a user or an application owner is registering an OAuth client. So that's really more the driver for like when you would want external storage as opposed to scalability nowadays. So like I said, we'll, in the near future, have that in directory, but for now, hopefully XML files will suit your needs. Feature number 4, just-in-time provisioning. So this is more on the service provider side of PingFederate. The PingFederate can be an identity provider or a service provider in a traditional SAML use case. PingFederate as a service provider is going to receive a single sign-on token, validate the signature on it, do all the checks there, make sure it has a trust relationship with that IDP, and then it bridges single sign-on to the target app you're going to. With just-in-time provisioning, what we can do is, upon that SSO of the user, we can see, do we have that user inside of the local directory server? We can do a lookup in the directory server, see if he already exists, and if he doesn't, we can create him at that time, so the entry is there. So by the time the SSO event happens to that target application, we already have a record of that user. So that ends up being your provisioning into the app just through the single sign-on event by that user. One thing that doesn't cover is deprovisioning. So when a user leaves that identity provider, you might not have, well, you're not going to have a single sign-on event because they're no longer there. What we can do to support that is SCIM support. So we do have SCIM support directly in PingDirectory. So you can expose that to your partners as a mechanism to remove that account or deactivate that account when the timing comes. Okay, and the last feature I'll talk about before handing over to John is account linking. Again, this is another service provider feature. With PingFederate acting as a service provider, upon that single sign-on event to the service provider, we can see at that time, again, do a lookup to see if we know about this user. Now, if you're using account linking, we're going to look up and try to make an association of that account to a local account that's already there. So maybe this is an application that you've already had for years. You already have local accounts in there with usernames and passwords and sort of login information. And you really just want to start binding the accounts from the identity provider to the local accounts. That's what account linking can help you with. So on first SSO, that user coming from the IDP, he's going to be prompted to log in locally at the service provider. But then on subsequent events, we're just going to look up that user and then know that user A from the IDP is really user X in the SP. So what that really looks like here on the IDP side, there's going to be some sort of login event there for you to get logged into your identity provider. You're going to perform a single sign-on operation into the service provider. So in PingFederate, acting as a service provider with account linking set up there, is going to do a check to see, okay, based off of the SAML token and the subject I see, is he in the local account linking store? So we'll look up in the directory to see if he's there. If he's not, if we don't know about him, then we will prompt the user to log in with their local service provider credentials. We'll then store that link in the account linking store. So then on subsequent logins, you'll just enter your username and password at the IDP, and then SSO into the SP, and then the account link is used to get you into that application. Okay, so those are the 5 features that will change your life after today if you're not already using them, and hopefully make federation and identity security taste a lot better. John.
All right, My name is DaSilva, and as Scott said, I'm with Professional Services at Ping. And I'm going to go through basically the 5 scenarios and show you them in action and go over the configuration. I'm not going to walk through the configuration because that would take way too much time, so we're just going to be reviewing the configuration. How many people are PingFederate administrators? So you're familiar with okay, pretty much the entire room, okay? To go through. So the first thing, if you're going to use PingDirectory with PingFederate, really the first thing you need to do is basically tell PingFederate where's PingDirectory set. Okay. So let me log in. And so what you are going to do is to define a data store, okay, pointing to that data source, okay, wherever it may be sitting. Going to give it a service account with the appropriate permissions that it needs. And if you do plan on using, for the password management feature, you do actually need to use LDAP S. So essentially, you do that basic configuration, and we're just going to simply use this over and over again for all of our use cases. Now, you could also have multiple directories. You're not restricted to just using one directory, but for this use case, I'm just going to use the same directory for everything. Everything's running locally on my machine, so the only time I have to go to the outside will be when we do the password change with Ping ID. We'll do that in demo. So once you've set up, your data source, as I said, you're going to just keep using it. And so the first feature I'm going to talk about is the password management features that are available. And the first thing you need to do is the form adapter, as I'm sure all of you are aware, needs a password credential validator to essentially validate the user's credentials. And the password credential validator is also the interface that the password management uses to manage those passwords, to allow the user to change their password, reset their password, unlock their account, whatever it is you've turned on, okay, in that. So the first thing you need to do is to configure the PCV. So go into password credential validators, and we're going to simply create a PCV, okay. Again, we're going to point to that data source. So we're leveraging that object. Where do our users sit in our directory? How are we going to essentially validate the user ID, okay? Now, of course, this search filter depends on how your users actually log in. So if they log in my example, the username field is going to be the UID, but if it was email, you could set up a filter here, and I've worked with some customers that have done that, is that they actually allow the user to enter a SAM account or UID or their email, whatever they feel more comfortable with, and essentially you can set up the filter to handle that properly. Your search scope and so forth. The advanced configuration is around basically the attributes that we're going to use for the password management. So we are going to have a contract here that we're going to provide. So for example, if you're going to use email, we need to know where their email is. If you're going to use SMS, we need a phone number for them. We can pull that out of the directory. If you're going to use Ping ID, we need to know what their ID you're providing the Ping ID is. So that's all configured here. In addition to that, you can also define what attributes you want to provide beyond the default attributes, essentially the extended contract that's going to go to the form adapter. So that's the first step. You've got your PCV set up. The next step is to set up the form adapter. So here's my password management form adapter. Okay. So point to my PCV that I'm going to use. The login part, challenge retries that I want to set, session information that I want to keep, allow password changes. Now, one of the things is there's really a lot of options that you can do with the form, and which options turned on really you're deciding here. So the allow password changes allows basically the user to essentially change their password. This is not, can be, I know I need to change it, I'm going to change it now, or it also will do the forced password. So if the directory comes back and says, their password is expired, they need to change it, this will force a password change. If this feature is not turned on, then they can't change it. Okay? You can use an external password management system. That feature has always been there, so it didn't go away. Remember, username is about making it convenient for the user, but what we're really interested in is the ability for the user to essentially deal with, I forgot my password. Okay? How do I handle that? And I want to handle that inside the form adapter. We also have notification. You can tell the user that their password is going to expire in 15 days, so they can get a heads up, okay, and show them that warning. But as I said, I'm going to focus around the password management feature of I forgot my password. Okay? It happens all the time, and we want to take that functionality for the help desk. And so what we need to do is provide some mechanism to effectively authenticate the user. And so we can use, as Scott mentioned, SMS, one-time link, a one-time password, or PingID. Okay, and so in this case, I'm going to use PingID. And here with PingID is whatever the user device has been registered for that user, the mechanism we're going to use. So it potentially could actually be email. Okay, so if that's what they're using. In my case, I'm going to do the swipe. The account unlock, I haven't turned that one on. That's actually a new feature with 8.4. I originally set up this demo with 8.3, so couldn't turn on that feature, so we're not going to demo that feature. That's basically the configuration to enable the password management. So let's go ahead and see it. So what I did is, in my configuration, I basically set up connections from my demo cases, essentially talking to myself. So I'm acting both in this PingFederate instance as the identity provider and as the service provider, and I decided to, for 3 of the demos, to use SAML because SAML is not dead, okay? OpenID Connect is just not going to be there that quickly. Right, Scott? Absolutely, okay. All right. SAML can die after I retire. All right, so let me go ahead. So I've set up the tabs for each. So essentially, I'm going to start an SSO event here. So I'm going to do the password change. So here's the form adapter, okay, asking me for my username and password. And the change password option, actually, let me increase the font size a little bit so it's not an eye chart, okay? So it's pretty standard, the change password feature. So I know I need to change my password. Click on that. It's going to take me to a prompt. Trouble signing on. Basically, I forgot my password. So I click on that, okay? And so it's going to ask me for my user ID that I'm going to use, and then it will send me a request depending on how the administrator configured that. And as I said, I'm going to use PingID. So I'm going to enter my test user here. Okay, so now it's sending to my phone. Patiently, so there's my phone. Swipe. Accepted it. Okay, now I need to reset my password. And as Scott mentioned, we are leveraging the policies in the directory. So I cannot simply use the classic two-federate password because my password policy is much stronger than that. So click reset. My password's been reset. Continue. I'm going to go ahead and log in with my new password. Isn't that an exciting demo? I know authentication's the best. I mean, it's what we live for. Okay. And I'm just, let me use the font here, but basically I'm just showing the the user is logged in. Okay, so that's the password management features that were introduced in 8.3 and enhanced in 8.4, leverage directory. The Next one that I'm going to go into is the storage of the, oh, oops, I got to go back to my cheat sheet. I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Nope. Oh, attribute fulfillment. Almost took it out of order. Okay. Attribute fulfillment. Now, if you're all PingFederate, most of you are PingFederate administrators, so this is, you know that you can basically look up information at any point from any data source. Okay. And again, as Scott pointed out, you can do that in the connection. You can do that when you're building the access token, if it's an OAuth grant. You can do it now in the adapter and essentially have an adapter contract that fulfills those attributes. So for example, if you're using the Kerberos adapter, you could put in a contract that the Kerberos adapter would return the user's email address, which it normally wouldn't, because you need that, because everybody needs an email address. Okay? I'm just going to basically show it in the configuration. So I've got in my connection here that I'm going to get a basic contract. Another thing I'm using in this particular configuration is I'm using authentication policy contracts to fill my connection. And I've decided that I don't have everything I need, so I'm going to do a lookup, an LDAP lookup to the directory. This, again, points to the existing data source, okay? Or it could be a different data source. It could be a database, different directory. Could even be a custom data source, for example. But we're interested here in directory. I'm going to, again, search in my container, put in the level, and then what do I want back? And what I want back is the department number, so that the department number is not part of my adapter contract. Because I don't need that attribute that often, so why include it in the adapter every time? So I'm just going to use it where I need it. I need it for this particular connection. For some reason I needed that. So I add that attribute, and then of course I'm going to do a filter on my source, and then of course map the attribute to fulfill my contract. Okay? So here's my department number, and that was actually in the prior connection demo that I did. So the department 45. Okay, and again, this came out of the directory. So the attribute fulfillment, and again, you can use this in any way. Essentially, where you're fulfilling an attribute contract, you can do lookups to get additional information from any data source, and even multiple data sources, as Scott pointed out. Okay? Using it for persistent grants, so storing my persistent grants in a directory. You need data. If you're going to be doing OAuth, my standard recommendation to customers is, yes, you need a data source, right, for your persistent grants. Get that done. Even if you don't think you're going to use persistent grants, like refresh tokens are, the terminology we typically use. But if you don't think, but just save yourself some pain and aggravation. Get a data source. And at one time, I was a DBA, so I don't have a problem with using the database. Okay? But you can use the directory, and that's what we're going to demonstrate. So really, this is not so much about the setup in PingFederate, because it's actually more behind the scenes. It's really setting up a directory also, because you got to basically put this information in a directory. And again, it can be, you don't have to store it in the same directory as you're using for your users, but in simplicity, I don't want to run multiple directory services. I did that. And what you need to do is, again, you have your data source. It's not configuration in the UI. It's some XML files that you've got to edit. So I'm going to hop over to a slide presentation and basically show you those. Okay? So the first thing you need to do is define, what your attributes are. Okay? In the directory that you're going to use. They are predefined for you, and they match to the attributes in the directory. But you can, if you decide that you want the schema to look a little bit different, you can essentially configure it here. A very important part of this configuration is this here. This is, the data source, okay? And this comes from, PingFederate. When you build your data source, it gets assigned a unique identifier, okay? And that's the information you need. So you need to have your data source first, and then you place that in this XML file, the Access Grant Management LDAP Unbound ID. You then also need to essentially turn on that feature that you're going to be using it in an LDAP data source, and do that in a Hive module, restart the server, and you're good to go. In a directory, okay, this is going to be a little bit hard to read this. I do have some access grants already, so you do have to essentially update the schema in your directory for those attributes, and we provide you the schema, and as Scott said, we provide you guidance on which attributes should be indexed for performance. So let me do a reload of that entry. So you can see I have 2 grants right now. I'm going to now do an OAuth flow using the playground, which has been mentioned in the previous session. All right, so this is the playground. I'm going to do an authorization code flow. So my client request, authenticate as a user, allow the grant. So I'm just doing a simple OAuth grant, not an OpenID Connect. And then my client's gonna get the access token. So I've got my access token, and I also have a refresh token. That's my persistent grant. And this now has been stored in the database, in our data source, the directory. So if I go back to Apache, do a reload, we now have 3 entries. Okay? So I don't have very active users. Okay? But that's basically it. We've stored the grant, and if we look at that object, the attributes that we've defined in the XML file, so if I slide back to my slide, okay, you can define what they're called in the directory. And again, the default is what's in the schema we provide. But you can, if for some reason you want to change it, that's fine. You just have to make sure to sync it up here with the XML file. Oops. Okay. All right, so that's the OAuth grants. The next one is going to be just-in-time provisioning. Again, this is a service provider feature. So the user comes in with an identity, and I need to provision them locally. Often, things with federation, whether it's OpenID Connect or you're using a SAML or whatever, often the thing we don't talk about, when we're talking federation, is the provisioning problem. You often do need to have an identity. Not only you authenticate at the identity provider, but the service provider also needs some information about you, depending on the nature of the application. And so how do we get that information? And just-in-time is one option. It's not the option. It's just one of the solutions that you can use. And from a configuration viewpoint, it's just simply in the IDP connection, we enable JIT provisioning, okay, just-in-time provisioning. That's basically it. You say, I want to use this for this particular connection, and once you've turned that on, then you need to basically decide where are those users going to be stored. Okay? Where are they going to be stored? What attributes are you going to be storing? You need to map the attributes that you're going to get from the assertion into the directory to create the users. Where do you want to put them? So again, I'm using the same directory, and what I'm doing is I've created a separate OU under JIT provisioning, and right now I have no users that are provisioned into my directory. So let's run through the use case. So again, this is a connection. I'm going to authenticate as John Brown from the IDP. I'm going to log in. And from the user's viewpoint, obviously, it's just another authentication event. Okay? Nothing is, from the user's perspective, there's really no difference here. You know, in reality, you don't know if JIT provisioning is being done or not, okay? Because it's not really their worry or concern. But if we go to our directory and do a reload, and there's John Brown with the attributes I decided to map into the directory. Okay, so now my user is provisioned. This takes care of adding a user, changing attributes. We can detect that the new values we got are different from what we had before, so we can update attributes. But it does not, as Scott said, handle deprovisioning. Okay. The last use case, again, this is account linking. Again, it's especially a SAML specific thing where I have an identity at the identity provider, and that identity is different at the service provider. So I need to essentially link the two accounts together in some fashion. And again, this is a service provider. So for example, you know, often an example of this type of use case, and it sometimes is around privacy, is around health providers. You know, you may not want to link directly, use the same identity that you're getting from the identity provider at the service provider. But there is an existing relationship there that we want to, at least at this point, establish this link. Another part of account linking that's part standard is to essentially allow for what's called defederation, which is essentially breaking that link, and that's a user functionality endpoint that you provide, and we do provide that. So from a PingFederate configuration, again, this is going to be on an IDP connection. I'm a service provider, and I'm going to, again, enable that I'm going to do account linking, and this is really more in my browser SSO profile. My identity mapping, okay? I'm going to do account linking, and what PingFederate is going to do is it's going to look up that user that comes in your assertion. If he exists, then we've already established the link. If he doesn't exist, then we're going to have him essentially authenticate again, okay, at the service provider so that we can establish the link. And that is actually provided by the adapter we're using. So it's not in connection, it's really tied to the adapter that we're using to invoke that. So the adapter essentially has to support that, has to be properly configured to do that, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, hit enter. I'm going to log in as John Brown again. No SSO for this poor user. And so now I've come in. I'm at the service provider, but I don't have this account linked. So John Brown does exist in my directory, okay? All right, as John Tester. Okay, so the identity is different. So I don't know him as John Brown. I want to link the two together. Okay, so back here, I'm going to log in with my local identity. And I'm logged in as John. And if we go back into the directory, and again do a reload, I've got a new attribute called account link that basically defines that IDP's identity. And in that attribute, what I have is that it's an IDP connection, it's account linking the identity of the connection, and the adapter that I used, and then the identity that came in as the SAML subject from the assertion. Okay, and essentially that's what's going to happen. So the next time I log in, I don't need to do that login again. Now, one of the things you need to understand with the account linking is you have to figure out where that data is going to go. Okay, it has to go into the directory somewhere. So you can create a custom object to hold that for your users, master. So depending on how you do it depends on your directory and basically your needs with the directory. Because with the directory, we're going to put it into an existing entry. If you're using a database with account linking, we actually maintain basically a separate table of that. But in this case, I want to kind of leverage the fact that I do have this local identity, so I'm putting it into my directory. Okay? And that's it. That's pretty much the last of my demos. So we still have time. We have about 5 minutes for questions.
Test.
Just real quick, I see you're using Apache to browse the Datastore. Could RSAT tools will work fine, right? Windows, we're a Windows shop through and through, so remote server administration tools provided by Microsoft, that would be, we could connect to the Datastore using that.
It does LDAP?
Yeah, so
I'm using
ADSI.
it's Apache's LDAP Studio, yeah. So
Okay.
I mean,
So just standard
the
LDAP.
directory, it's an LDAP directory.
Cool.
So
Thanks.
that's.
During the demo, you actually showed an app, right, for password reset, I guess? I've never seen that before. Is that something new?
Yeah, that is actually the form adapter, the HTML. Yeah, it's a new feature. We introduced in A3 the password management feature. And so it's actually the HTML form adapter with a bunch of new options.
So it's not an app?
No, it's not an app.
So it was a browser that you were doing that on?
Yeah, it was on the browser. Well, the app that I was using was PingID. So with the password reset, I basically need to authenticate the user off in some other mechanism, okay? So I went in, I said, you know, I'm Joe, I forgot my password, so it sent to my PingID app, and that's what I showed on my phone, was the PingID app. So that, yeah, that was the option I selected, that to essentially authenticate the fact that, yes, it is I that made the request to change the password, and then when the request was received back by the form adapter, then it prompted me to reset my password and accepted that change.
All right, okay.
Yeah, so that's, yeah. So,
And
it would be the same, you know, if it was an SMS link, you know, you did an SMS text message, you know, essentially we need to have another way of authenticating that person who's changing their password. And we're also using PingID. It's a second factor of authentication too, okay? So we're leveraging it to reset the password and also as a second factor, you know, for our applications.
Thanks. And did I hear that in this particular case, I think you're using account linked as the attribute. So we can have our own custom
you
attribute.
can create, yeah. So what I did in this particular case, now it's kind of a challenge. You have to figure out what you're going to do. Yeah, I could have created a completely separate object, but then I'd have to make a lot of changes in my directory. What I did was added an attribute account link to I basically created my own version of the inet.org person, okay, and added an additional attribute. Or I could have used an existing attribute. You know, it's really, if you're going to do account linking, that's the problem you got to figure out. And there are different options, and we talk about that also in the documentation, you know.
I had a question with regards to the use of the Ping directory versus if you were going to use your own LDAP directory with PingID. Can you use PingID against your own separate directory? Okay, that's the case. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were talking about deprovisioning. How's that done with?
Well, with Justintime, there is no deep provisioning. That's kind of the challenge, the drawback with Justintime, is there is no deep provisioning. So you have to effectively do it in some other way. What Scott mentioned, you could use Skim. directory supports SCIM. So you could provide, although, if I was going to go down a path of SCIM for deprovisioning, I'd provide it as an option for provisioning and really to kind of take it offline. The provisioning problem is often, got to figure out, okay, what makes sense? What's the best option to do it? The just-in-time is kind of a cheap way of kind of doing it, but it does give you that problem that you can't deprovision. Okay.
And you were talking about with a persistent grant, you were going to index certain columns?
Yeah. So you want to, basically, I think the two attributes we need to index is client and user.
Recently updated the documentation on this, so.
Because I didn't do the indexing. I didn't have a lot of them. That would be my next step. But yeah, the document, I think it's client and the user ID. Because basically, we're going back. So when a user can come in and manage their persistent grants, so I'm going to do a query to retrieve all of their persistent grants.
These are the ones here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So-
there's actually 5 different ones that we recommend indexes on. So there's a page on our documentation on this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and with a directory, so if you were doing, you can use a database to store those grants. With the SQL scripts we provide for, for your DBAs, we provide the indexes on them. With directory, depends on the directory how you handle it. So we provide the schema to update your schema, but you have to go in and create the attribute, the indexes. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I think actually we're done with this. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for hanging in there.